Varos stood in the Red Keep's reception hall among an assembly of foreign delegates, Westerosi lords, and freedmen representatives, the bright lights of golden chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors. It was an evening of formal conversation and cautious diplomacy, a follow-up gathering after the tentative peace accords had been signed between Freedman's empire and King Robert's realm. Now delegates from the free cities mixed with local courtiers, Freedman legionnaires, and a few scattered Targaryen loyalists who had emerged from old corners in the wake of Daenerys' new ascension in Essos. The air thrummed with both curiosity and nervous excitement, for the freedmen had only recently proven they carried enough power to overshadow Balerian's ancient legacy, and yet they stood here in courtesy instead of conquest. Varos, in robes of crimson and black, had come to the reception as Daenerys' second, the emblem of Freedman's unstoppable might, though he had chosen a calm, courteous demeanor for the sake of the evening's illusions of peace. Many in the hall had only heard rumors of him. Some said he was a sorcerer who commanded dragons beyond imagining. Others said he was a prophet of the Lord of Light. Whichever name or rumor they believed, seeing him in person brought an extra hush to the gathering. On one side of the room, King Robert Baratheon stood near a table laden with decanters of wine, exchanging bawdy jokes with a small cluster of Westerosi lords who half laughed, half worried about Freedman's dominion. Robert wore a simpler version of his regal attire, a dark doublet with the stag sigil in gold thread over his broad chest. He had only sipped a few goblets of wine so far, perhaps mindful that a new crisis could erupt at any moment, given Freedman's presence and the fractious nature of the delegates from the free cities. Ned Stark hovered near Robert, wearing his characteristic furs despite the southern heat, quietly watching the interplay of freedmen representatives and local lords. Farther along, Daenerys herself conversed with a small group of Westerosi ladies who were curious about the freedmen's new expansions. They asked about dragons, freedmen councils, and rumors that even Volantis had nearly capitulated. Margaery Tyrell stood near Daenerys, wearing a rose-themed gown, always quick with gentle words to ease tension. Robb Stark, newly wed to Margaery, drifted between freedmen officers and northern bannermen, bridging both worlds with the open manner that had become his signature. Jon Snow hovered near Daenerys, quietly fielding questions about Freedman's day-to-day governance. But as the evening progressed, he shifted around, greeting old friends and receiving courtesy nods from lords who had not yet grown used to Freedman's presence in the capital. In short, the entire gathering felt like a show of improbable alliances. North and South, Freedmen and Westeros, all forging fragile smiles and polite conversation under the watchful glow of torches. Varos, for his part, had chosen a position nearer to King Robert, noticing that some of the delegates from the free cities, particularly Braavos and Lys, were lingering close to the king as well, murmuring about future trade or neutrality. At intervals, Varos spoke softly with them, acknowledging that freedmen expansions would not hamper their shipping lanes if no slavery remained in their dominions. The delegates responded with courtesy, though some looked uneasy about standing so near the rumored sorcerer who overshadowed Balerion. Varos gave them no cause for alarm, smiling in that measured way that suggested he was as mortal as the next man, though a subtle aura still clung to him, an intangible sense of power that even the least sensitive courtiers felt in the air. One delegate, from Pentos perhaps, stammered a small joke about Freedman's unstoppable dragons, to which Varos gave a diplomatic answer about freedmen focusing on peace unless forced. The tension lessened. Robert, overhearing a snippet, let out a half-laugh, half-grunt as if to say, "Better we never see such dragons in war." Ned, standing a pace behind Robert, offered a nod to Varos, silently acknowledging the uneasy synergy that had formed. Everything seemed poised for a smooth evening. Then, across the hall, a sudden hush snaked through a cluster of delegates from Volantis, Myr, and Tyrosh. They had been standing near a large column, half in the shadows, their conversation with each other glancing occasionally at Varos. One in particular, a tall, hawkish figure in robes with the sigil of Volantis, kept darting his gaze in Varos's direction. His posture stiffened whenever Varos's name passed the lips of nearby freedmen. Something about that man's demeanor radiated hostility. Clenched jaw, fists curled at his sides, eyes flicking to Varos as though measuring a target. Varos, caught up in a mild chat with Robert about Freedman's next steps, did not notice the man at first. Yet Jon Snow, passing by with a goblet in hand, happened to see the delegate from Volantis stare intently at Varos, incanting something under his breath. Another Freedman officer, standing near the dais, also noticed. But before either Jon or the officer could act, the Volantine delegate took a sudden step forward, weaving through the crowd with alarming speed. He erupted from behind a cluster of lords, brandishing a slim, curved knife in his right hand. The gold cloaks stationed in the corners did not react in time, nor did Robert's personal guard. Most of them had drifted to the hall's perimeter, wrongly assuming no harm would befall a formal reception with Freedman present. A moment of shock seized the onlookers. The man lunged at Varos, chanting in a sharp, accented voice, "Death to the tyrant!" Some watchers believed he meant Daenerys, but he was clearly fixated on Varos. The Freedman's famed sorcerer barely had time to pivot as the knife arced toward his chest. Yet in that heartbeat, Varos's eyes flared with a sudden, bright red luminescence, as though a hidden flame ignited behind them. He raised an arm in a seemingly effortless gesture, humming a phrase that carried an eerie resonance in the Red Keep's hush. The delegate froze mid-lunge, the blade mere inches from Varos's robe. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Robert half lifted a hand to shield himself from a potential blow, cursing, but found no immediate guard to intervene. Ned took a step forward, face grim. Then came the truly horrifying moment. The assailant's face contorted, eyes going wide and bloodshot, as if some immense pressure seized him from within. Varos's low hum shifted into melodic Valyrian words. The flames in the nearest torches leaped higher, dancing along the walls with unnatural vigor. The air crackled with heat. The man from Volantis dropped to his knees with a tortured cry, blood beginning to stream from his tear ducts. Onlookers recoiled, stifling horrified screams. Freedman delegates recognized it as an advanced form of R'hlloreth's wrath, a conjuration Varos seldom used but evidently found no choice here. The man tried to speak, but only choked gurgles emerged. Within a half-dozen heartbeats, he collapsed face forward onto the polished floor, body twitching, blood leaking from eyes and nose. The entire hall fell into stunned silence, the echoes of Varos's chant dissipating. Then the man ceased moving, a final spasm rattling his limbs. He was dead, killed by a surging wave of arcane power. Freedman might call it justice for an attempted assassination. Westerosi lords stared in dumbstruck shock. Robert, regaining his wits, let out a coarse laugh that echoed unervingly in the silence, perhaps a reflex to diffuse tension or to mask his own alarm. "Fucking Valyrian magic!" he exclaimed, stepping aside from the body on the floor. The courtiers parted around the corpse, fear and awe warring in their expressions. Freedman legionnaires rushed forward belatedly, as did a pair of gold cloaks, unsure how to respond now that the crisis was done. The smell of iron and the sting of ozone clung to the air, as though the sorcery had left a tangible residue. Varos lowered his arm, eyes returning to normal, though his face remained impassive. A Freedman officer behind him trembled slightly, never having seen Varos wield such a direct lethal enchantment in a public forum. Ned took a few steps forward, brow knitted in concern. "Varos, is everything? Are you all right?" Varos exhaled slowly, letting the tension drain from his posture. "I am unharmed, Lord Stark. This man attacked me, calling me a tyrant. I had no choice but to defend myself swiftly. My apologies for the disturbance." His voice remained unervingly calm, even apologetic, though the lifeless body on the floor told a grim story. Murmurs spread among the delegates. Some demanded to know why the man had done such a thing. Others whispered that Freedman's unstoppable might was not just dragons but also a dreaded sorcery that could kill a man from within. A cluster of Myrish merchants stepped back from Varos, pale as ghosts, while a Bravosi envoy hissed that no mortal should hold such power. Freedman officers gently turned the corpse over, seeing the man's contorted face still stained with fresh blood. No one recognized him as a highborn lord of Volantis, so presumably he was an underling or a fanatic sent to sabotage Freedman's goodwill. The question that crackled through every onlooker's mind was, for whom had he shouted, "Death to the tyrant"? Did he see Varos as the real tyrant, or had he ironically meant King Robert only to find Varos in the way? Robert, stepping over the body, made a show of nonchalance, though a certain tightness around his eyes betrayed his alarm. He turned to the watchers, clearing his throat. Well, that was a short-sighted attempt, wasn't it? Looks like Freedman's famed magic spares no fool. Might want to see this body removed. Yes. He gestured to a few gold cloaks who finally mustered the nerve to approach. Get rid of it. The night's festivities will not be ruined by a single misguided wretch. Ned, heart-pounding, tried to keep the peace. Your Grace, perhaps we should question if the man had co-conspirators. An attempt on Varos's life here in the Red Keep is no small matter. The Freedman might interpret it as a violation of our trust. We can't just discard him without investigating. Robert sighed, looking irritated. I investigate if you must, Ned. But can we do it quietly? The rest of these delegates need not watch us rummage a corpse. Freedman or otherwise, it's done. The man is dead, threatened a guest right in my presence, and Freedman's unstoppable magic ended him. That's the gist. So remove him, keep the realm calm. Varos, I trust you aren't offended at our lax security. Varos flicked a mild glance at Robert, then at Ned. I hold no grudge for your security's shortcoming. Freedman, do not blame you for this man's misguided attempt. He is responsible for his own fate. Should you wish an investigation, Freedman delegates will cooperate. But please, do not let it shatter the amity we have established. One fanatic does not speak for every delegate from Volantis. Jon approached carefully, sensing the tension in the air. Freedman delegates retreated a step from the scene, while Westerosi onlookers stared, half in shock, half in grim fascination. Jon placed a hand lightly on Varos's arm. Are you unhurt, truly? No cuts, no repercussions from the sorcery. Varos gave him a small nod. I am unharmed, yes. The magic was swift, a reflex to prevent further violence. Freedmen do not flaunt it lightly, but the alternative might have been a knife in my chest. He lifted the edge of his robe, showing no tear or wound. The people around them exhaled in quiet awe. Ned cast a glance at the freedman officer kneeling by the corpse, instructing him to cover it with a cloth. We'll discreetly move him to a side chamber, see if we can find any insignia or letter on him. Perhaps we'll learn who financed or incited him. Varos, I trust you can answer any question we have about this confrontation, if needed. Varos bowed slightly. Certainly, Lord Stark. I bear no secrets about this attempt. He called me a tyrant, lunged with a blade, and I defended myself. Freedmen do not relish bloodshed, but we will not fall to petty assassins. Across the hall, Daenerys had arrived, alerted by the commotion. She parted the crowd and rushed to Varos's side, eyes scanning him for injury. Seeing him unscathed, she let out a relieved sigh, then turned to Robert and Ned with a measured calm. I am told an assassin from Volantis attacked Varos. This is grave indeed, but freedmen do not blame the realm. We only wish to clarify if the man acted alone or under some conspirator's orders. Ned nodded. I shall see to it, Your Grace. We will keep freedmen informed. Let us not let a single fanatic unravel everything we have built. Robert, half silent, gave a quick nod of agreement. His face flushed from the tension and possibly a bit of wine. Meanwhile, freedmen delegates muttered in uneasy clusters, some recalling that Volantis had been among the last major strongholds resisting freedmen's expansions. Perhaps some exiled slaver lords had dispatched this assassin to slay Varos, hoping to sabotage Freedman's alliance with Westeros or to spark a crisis that would mar Freedman's name. Others whispered that maybe the assassin had aimed at King Robert, calling him a tyrant, but Varos was in the way. That question simmered. Who was the real tyrant in the assassin's mind? Robert, catching wind of that speculation, let out another harsh chuckle that carried more bitterness than mirth. Fucking Valyrian magic, indeed. If the poor fool hated me, well, Varos spared me the trouble. If he hated freedmen, he failed. Either way, he's done. Let the historians guess which tyrant he meant. He gave the crowd a dismissive wave. "Resume your gatherings, people. The show's over." With that, the gold cloaks ushered the body away through a side door, Freedman legionnaires stepping aside to let them pass. Murmurs lingered, but the tension gradually eased as Robert barked for music to resume, or for those present to continue their business. Some delegates made a show of returning to polite discussions about trade or alliances, though an undercurrent of fear wove through the hall. The freedmen had displayed a lethal brand of magic, and Varos wielded it as calmly as one might flick away a buzzing fly. The demonstration was both horrifying and mesmerizing. As the throng dispersed into subdued pockets of chatter, Varos withdrew to a corner near a tall window. Daenerys, Jon, and a freedman officer followed, ensuring he was well. The freedman officer spoke first in a hushed voice. "Lord Varos, are you certain no retribution is needed against Volantis? The assassins singled you out, chanting about tyranny. Perhaps the slavers or rebels in Volantis resent freedman expansions." Varos gazed out the window at the courtyard below, where a few legionnaires patrolled. "No immediate retribution. Freedman expansions proceed logically, not fueled by vengeance for one assassin. Let the investigation proceed. If we find a bigger plot, we respond. If not, we treat this as a lone fanatic. Freedmen do not hunger for fresh conflict." Daenerys spoke quietly, placing a hand on Varos's arm. "Agreed. We cannot let one incident spark war. We remain in courtesy with Westeros. Varos, you did what you had to do, but the image of that man bleeding from his eyes might stoke fear. Perhaps we should show extra kindness in the coming days to reassure the realm." Varos inclined his head. "You speak wisely, Daenerys. Freedmen have no desire to overshadow these halls with dread. I shall keep to my quarters for the night. Let the realm breathe. I do not regret protecting myself, but the method was dire. The Lord of Light's flame shielded me. That is enough." Jon exhaled, recalling the hush that fell when the man collapsed. "Yes, the realm must see freedmen do not casually slaughter. If we remain calm, it underscores that we only responded in self-defense. Meanwhile, we can let Ned Stark investigate." Robert's half-joking remark about Valyrian magic doesn't help, but perhaps better some morbid humor than a cry for vengeance. Varos gave Jon a nod of gratitude. "Your perspective remains invaluable. Let us see how the night concludes. We can speak to Robb or Marjorie if they wish reassurance. Freedmen are not undone by a single madman. We stand firm." Thus, the freedmen took a subdued stance for the rest of the evening, speaking softly with a handful of Westerosi lords who approached them with wary politeness. The delegates from Braavos or Lys, who earlier had boasted about neutrality, now treated Varos with an even more guarded courtesy, glimpsing firsthand the lethal might he commanded with a mere chant. Another freedman officer ushered Daenerys away from the hall, ensuring she found rest, while Jon lingered behind to quell any rumors, repeating that freedmen had no intention of punishing an entire city for one assassin's deed. Ned Stark quietly began organizing a handful of gold cloaks to rummage the assassin's belongings, hoping to find a letter or token that might identify who truly labeled Varos or Robert a tyrant. The question burned among the watchers. For whom was the man's final words, "Death to the tyrant," truly meant? Some freedmen whispered that the delegate had recognized Varos's unstoppable expansions as tyranny, thinking freedmen overshadowed the free will of any city. Others speculated the assassin actually meant Robert Baratheon, calling him an usurper tyrant from the old rebellion days, but simply struck at the easiest target near him, which happened to be Varos in mid-conversation. In either scenario, the man was dead, and the answer might never be confirmed. It lingered like a quiet riddle. Was Varos truly the tyrant, or was Robert? Robert, for his part, retreated to a smaller solar with Ned and a pair of lords who sought his reaction. He threw back a goblet of wine, cursing the stupidity of men who attempt murder in the Red Keep. Ned, calmer, suggested they glean the assassin's motive, but Robert only scoffed that it was likely resentment over freedmen expansions. Let freedmen handle their expansions. So long as they don't cross the sea, I don't care who calls Varos a tyrant. The fool ended up dead by unstoppable sorcery. Good riddance. Ned responded that they must ensure Freedman's vow of peace continued, and that no further assassins lurked. Robert waved him off but grudgingly agreed to let the gold cloaks do their due diligence. Outside, the night advanced. Freedman legionnaires took up watch near the assassin's corpse, which had been moved to a side chamber. The lords who had come from Volantis, ironically, professed ignorance of the man, claiming he was a lesser functionary. That story might unravel under scrutiny. The Freedman officer leading the initial questioning found no letter on him, only a small sigil indicating some old house in Volantis that might have ties to slaver families. A quiet hum of suspicion enveloped them, suspecting that a faction of slavers from Volantis had sent him to kill Varos. If so, Freedman expansions into Volantis might face a minor backlash, but it would not deter the unstoppable might Freedman had. In any event, no new crisis erupted this night. Across the Red Keep, the reception lingered on, albeit subdued. Delegates returned to mild talk, though the memory of the delegates' eyes bleeding out haunted them. Freedman's unstoppable flame was not just a rumor. It had manifested before their own eyes, a terrifying testament to Varos's capabilities. Robert's coarse laughter might have punctuated the scene, but no one forgot that Freedman's expansions overshadowed Balerion, and that one chant from Varos ended an assassin in seconds. The realm weighed the events of the night. Some concluded Freedman's vow of peace was stable if no one threatened them. Others worried Freedman's unstoppable might would overshadow the realm eventually. But for now, no open conflict brewed, as Freedman seemed content to remain dignified and calm. When the crowd finally dispersed in the late hours, Varos stood in the corridor outside the hall, leaning against a pillar. Jon arrived from the side, having overseen a few Freedman legionnaires ensuring Daenerys had gone to her quarters safely. The corridor was lit by a couple of flickering torches. Varos turned to Jon with a mild question in his gaze. Do you think this incident shakes the realm's newly found trust in Freedman, or do they accept it as a necessary defense? Jon gave a weary shrug. Both. Some will recall the assassin lunged first, chanting about tyranny. They'll see your response as self-defense. Others will fixate on the brutality of Valyrian magic. The city watchers remain uneasy, but I doubt Robert or Ned holds you at fault. The vow Freedman gave to stand in peace stands. If anything, the realm now knows Freedman will not hesitate to defend themselves. Varos inclined his head, letting out a thoughtful hum. Then we proceed. Our expansions remain across the sea. This was but a single moment. I sense no unraveling of alliances over one fanatic's blood. Let tomorrow dawn, and Freedman remain allied with Westeros in courtesy. That is enough. Jon nodded. Yes, it suffices. We might do well to show a measure of humility in the next day or two. Reassure lords that Freedmen prefer reason. Perhaps some final gatherings before we depart can calm any lingering fear. Meanwhile, Ned and Robert can unearth who spurred that assassin. Freedman need not dwell on it, unless a bigger plot emerges. Varos gave a mild smile. Wise as always, Jon. Let us rest then. We shall see how the city stirs in the morning. The question of which man was truly the tyrant, Robert or me, can remain an enigma. Freedmen do not have time to chase every rumor. With that, he strode off into the adjoining corridor, robes trailing behind him, heading to Freedman's assigned quarters. Jon watched him vanish, remembering the hush that fell when that delegate from Volantis bled out. The question lingered in Jon's own mind. The man had chanted, "Death to the tyrant." But Freedman expansions were unstoppable, overshadowing Balerion. Perhaps, to that delegate, Varos was indeed the tyrant. Or maybe the man blamed Robert's long reign, saw him as an usurper who overshadowed Targaryens. The realm might never know, and so the matter might fade into the background, a single death overshadowed by Freedman's cosmic flame. True to Varos's expectation, dawn arrived with no immediate uproar beyond mild rumor. The assassin's body had been examined, and Ned announced to Robert that they found insignias of certain Volantene families known to have once thrived on the slave trade. Freedman expansions presumably threatened them, so they tried a desperate gambit. Robert shrugged, content to let Freedman handle any ramifications. Freedman's legionnaires in the city took no retaliatory measures, confirming to watchers that Freedman truly wanted no war on Westerosi soil. The delegates from other free cities, including Myr, Lys, and Braavos, quietly distanced themselves from that assassin, proclaiming no involvement in such madness. The day saw Freedman continuing quiet trade talks or packing their supplies for departure. In a private meeting, Daenerys, Jon, and Varos conferred with Ned, Robert, Marjorie, and Robb. They reiterated Freedman's no-hard-feelings stance regarding the incident, acknowledging the assassin as an isolated fanatic. Marjorie thanked Freedman for not letting it escalate, while Robb once more expressed House Stark's thanks that Freedman refrained from punishing an entire city. Robert, leaning on his warhammer, half-laughed about how one misguided bastard had to try stabbing Freedman's might in the heart of the Red Keep, only to meet a swift end. The group parted with a sense that the realm would not let the incident overshadow the established accord. Freedman remained set to sail back to Essos soon, carrying with them the knowledge that if any future crisis reared its head, Westeros might stand in alliance rather than hostility. That evening, one final dinner found Freedman delegates and Westerosi lords sharing a subdued farewell. Varos appeared only briefly, exchanging polite words with a few lords who still eyed him with fear. Jon hovered by Daenerys, deflecting anxious questions. Marjorie teased that the city might spin countless legends about Freedman's unstoppable flame after this night, but better legends than a real war. Robb, sipping from a goblet of wine, recounted to some freedmen how House Stark had faced the undead, forging alliances with Daenerys back then, and how that synergy might yet define the future. By the dinner's end, Freedman's presence had become accepted as a bizarre but non-threatening phenomenon. The question of tyranny receded behind daily gossip, overshadowed by the knowledge Freedman was leaving the city soon. Finally, the next dawn saw Freedman's retinue gather at the harbor, with Daenerys, Varos, and Jon at the fore. Robert and Ned arrived to see them off, as did Marjorie and Robb. Despite the assassin's attempt, no new hostility flared. Freedman boarded their ships, a moderate fleet bearing the sigils that combined Targaryen elements with the flame-laced symbol Varos introduced. Maelstrom, the monstrous dragon, soared overhead, overshadowing entire sections of the harbor's sky once more. But he did not incinerate anything, merely circled protectively as Freedman weighed anchor. Many small folk gawked from the harbor's edges, half in awe, half in relief that Freedman took their unstoppable dragons away from the capital. On deck, Varos lingered at the rail, gazing across the water toward the city ramparts, presumably feeling the city's tension recede as Freedman parted. Daenerys stood near him, her silver-gold hair shining in the morning light. Jon, wearing Freedman's ambassador attire, finalizing small details with the gold cloaks about any leftover Freedman delegates who might remain. It all seemed orderly, no sign of another attempt on Varos's life. As the fleet pulled away from King's Landing, Robert, Ned, Robb, Marjorie, and a scattering of onlookers watched from the docks. They saw Freedman's sails vanish into the distance, with only the faint silhouette of a massive dragon overhead. The city collectively exhaled. Freedman had come, overshadowed them with monstrous dragons and mysterious magic, but left without conquering or unleashing war. The once dreaded rumor that Freedman might cross the sea and devastate King's Landing, overshadowing Balerions' fabled conquests, remained just a rumor. Instead, Freedman displayed unstoppable might only when defending themselves from an assassin. So ended that chapter in the realm's evolving story. Robert would later guffaw to Ned about how one mad assassin nearly turned the hall into a bloodbath, but Freedman snuffed it out in seconds with some devilish chant, and how perhaps that show of magic would keep other plotters from daring a strike. Ned, more reflective, admitted it might sow fear. But better fear than open war, he reasoned, if Freedman expansions truly overshadowed any feasible defense Westeros could mount. Meanwhile, Freedman sailed home, no illusions about the precarious peace. If conspirators from Volantis or other cities remained, Freedman would quell them in Essos. The vow to House Stark stood, a testament to Freedman's sense of moral alliance. The memory of the assassin's last words, "Death to the tyrant," lingered, though the realm never conclusively answered who he deemed the tyrant. Some freedmen whispered that if Varos was a tyrant, he was at least a benevolent one. Others insisted the assassin aimed to kill Robert, ironically striking at Varos by mistake. The question died with the fanatic. Weeks later, the city's rumor mill found other topics. Marjorie's new charities in the capital, potential trade routes with Freedman's enclaves, and the general presence of Freedman delegates forging official ties with the crown. The horror of seeing a man bleed from his eyes under Valyrian sorcery became a grim anecdote retold in taverns, part cautionary tale, part dark fascination. The realm, in its uncertain path, carried on, bearing witness that Freedman's unstoppable might could be lethal in the blink of an eye. Yet Freedman sought no immediate subjugation. This paradox shaped their reputation. A force overshadowing Valyrian, guided by cunning illusions, forging alliances rather than burning kingdoms. In the end, the day's events raised that subtle question that lingered in every corridor of the Red Keep. If Freedman's unstoppable flame proved so direct and lethal, who truly was the tyrant? If any? Had the assassin glimpsed in Varos the seeds of cosmic dominion overshadowing entire continents? Or had he despised Robert's old rebellion, labeling him a false king? The answer never surfaced, and none in the realm could confirm. Perhaps it hardly mattered. Freedmen had shown their willingness to stand by Daenerys' moral cause, and Robert's Westeros had not burned in the face of that might. The realm resumed its daily intrigues, overshadowed by the knowledge that Freedman possessed a power beyond mortal measure, yet seemingly harnessed it only in self-defense. Whether that made them the gentlest of tyrants or the realm's greatest protectors remained an open debate. For now, each side parted with a fragile peace, a testament to the swirling changes the world had seen since the White Walkers' defeat and Freedman's improbable expansions. The winds across King's Landing's tournament grounds carried a pleasant warmth that morning, a welcome relief from the city's usual humidity. Pennants of gold and red fluttered along wooden stands, while a sea of onlookers crowded in, wearing their house colors or Freedman tokens. This particular tourney had been hastily arranged by King Robert Baratheon, an enthusiastic idea sparked by the sense of relief that had settled after Freedman pledged no conquest. The realm, still reeling from the spectacle of monstrous dragons overshadowing Balerian's legend, looked forward to a day of sport. Robert had insisted on staging a grand jousting event, hoping to display Westerosi valor while Freedman visitors observed. Yet for all his eagerness, the king found himself barred from competing. His council, led by Ned Stark and spurred by a handful of anxious lords, deemed it too risky for a monarch who remained crucial to maintaining an uneasy peace. Robert fumed inwardly, forced to watch from a central dais near the royal box, uncomfortably reminding him of simpler days when he could break lances with the best knights. Now he bore the weight of rule and an aging body that no longer moved as it once had. In the stands, a swirl of Freedman delegates, Westerosi lords, and Free City's envoys took their seats, each curious about the day's participants. Daenerys Targaryen, wearing a subdued gown that mixed Targaryen colors with Freedman style, found herself at a vantage from which she could see the entire tilt yard. Jon Snow sat just behind her on a bench, Freedman insignia embroidered on his otherwise simple leather doublet. He cast occasional glances at the lords around them, ensuring Freedman's presence did not spark tension. Meanwhile, Marjorie Tyrell and Robb Stark shared a place of honor near King Robert's dais, flanked by Catelyn Stark, Lady Olenna, and other notables. Freedman legionnaires mingled with gold cloaks around the perimeter, ensuring no repeat of the attempted assassination that had marred a previous gathering. The city still breathed quietly, half expecting some new drama to erupt. But this day, it seemed, was meant for celebration, for bridging Freedman with the realm through the time-honored tradition of jousting. At the far end of the tilt yard, the list of participants was read aloud by a herald wearing the stag and crown insignia. The usual suspects appeared: knights from the Vale, men of the Reach representing House Tyrell, a few hardy northern bannermen, and even some brash freeriders hoping to earn coin or reputation. But three names drew special attention. The first was Prince Oberin Martell, who had loitered in King's Landing for some weeks now, finding endless amusements in Freedman's presence and the swirl of politics. He had never been known as a jouster so much as a spear fighter, but his flair for drama and skill in the saddle made him a surprise contender. The second name was Jon Snow, the Freedman ambassador, which prompted a rustle of whispers. Few expected the quiet northern figure to challenge knights in a joust. Yet rumor said he had gained formidable skill traveling with Freedman, even riding monstrous dragons. Some guessed he came simply to test himself among Westerosi lords, bridging Freedman and local traditions. The third name, and perhaps the greatest shock, was Varos, Freedman's storied sorcerer overshadowing Balerion, rumored to have unstoppable power. The notion that he would don armor and tilt in a mundane joust struck many as bizarre or terrifying. After all, Freedman expansions had soared with dragons and arcane might, not lance and horse. Some asked, was this an attempt to prove Freedman recognized Westerosi customs, or a demonstration that Freedman could master any form of contest? No one quite knew, but excitement soared. King Robert, slouched in his seat with a face stuck between boredom and envy, thumped the arm of his dais. He muttered to Ned, who stood at his side, "Seven hells, Ned. I can't believe I must watch this from the stands. I'd sooner break a dozen lances myself. My old Warhammer days might be behind me, but I can still ride. Damn the council for coddling me." Ned responded quietly, "Your Grace, your presence is needed intact. If Freedman or any crisis arises, we cannot risk you taking a blow from some knight's lance. I know it chafes, but it's for the best. Look, at least you get to see if Freedman can handle a normal joust. That alone is worth observing." Robert snorted, picking up his cup. "Bah, maybe. But if Freedmen overshadow us with monstrous dragons, does it matter if they can also hold a lance? Let's see if your boy Jon or that cunning Oberin can provide a decent show. And that blasted Varos. I never guessed a sorcerer might stoop to jousting." Ned only shook his head at Robert's grumbling. On the other side, Marjorie Tyrell and Robb Stark conversed with Freedman delegates, exchanging polite remarks about how Freedman might adapt to the rules of jousting. Marjorie admitted she found it fascinating to see Freedman bridging martial forms beyond dragons, while Robb expressed mild concern for Jon's safety. "He's no green boy, but the joust can be lethal if misjudged," he said. Marjorie reassured him that many squires, knights, and lords found new skill from traveling abroad. She teased that if Freedman overshadowed Balerion, perhaps Freedman overshadowed Westerosi knights as well. Robb offered a half-smile but kept an eye on the tilt yard, curious to see how it all panned out. Meanwhile, Daenerys sat with Daenerys's Freedman retinue, including a few officers, but her attention kept drifting to where Varos stood in a corner of the yard, adjusting unfamiliar pieces of plate over his sorcerer's robe. She found the sight almost comical. Freedmen typically relied on dragons or disciplined formations, not single combat with lance and mount. Yet Varos had insisted that Freedman could meet any challenge Westeros cherished, as a show of courtesy. She watched him laugh quietly with Oberin Martell, who wore flamboyant Dornish armor tinted with orange and gold. Jon Snow, dressed more simply in a dull gray breastplate over Freedman's leathers, tested a borrowed warhorse in slow circles, ensuring the steed recognized him. She recalled how Jon had once proven a skilled rider in the north, though jousting had never been his principal discipline. The entire spectacle was novel. Freedmen, the unstoppable overshadowers of Balerion, lowering themselves to the realm's formal pastime. The city's stands overflowed with gawkers, eager to see if Freedmen and local contenders might clash dramatically. At last, the herald announced the first round of jousts. The field of participants was set into pairs, each pair taking the tilt in turn, armed with practice lances that, while dulled, could still knock a man senseless. The hush settled over the stands. Freedman legionnaires found seats near the edges, stirring mild apprehension among local watchers, but no one objected. This day was meant to be friendly. Prince Oberin was matched early against a Tyrell knight from Highgarden. The knight boasted a more conventional style, wearing shining mail and a bright green cloak with golden roses. Oberin, by contrast, bore a slender shield marked with the sun and spear of House Martell. As they readied their horses, a swirl of cheers and jeers rose. Oberin gave a cavalier grin, twirling his lance with unashamed flamboyance. Robert, from his dais, muttered to Ned that the Dornish always liked flair. But at least Oberin had the skill to back it up. The signal rang. Hoofs thundered. Lances angled. On the first pass, Oberin deftly shifted in his saddle, letting his opponent's lance glance off his shield, while he delivered a controlled strike that struck the Tyrell knight's shoulder, nearly unhorsing him. The stands erupted in gasps. A second pass left the Tyrell knight tumbling to the ground in a swirl of dust. Oberin circled back, dismounted elegantly to help the man up. Applause roared from half the stands, with some Tyrell supporters grudgingly acknowledging a well-earned victory. Oberin winked at the crowd, taking in the applause as if it were wine. He advanced to the next round with minimal sweat. Elsewhere, Jon Snow faced an unheralded knight from the Westerlands, a man in lion-crested armor but of no great renown. The crowd quieted, not sure what to expect from Freedman's ambassador. Jon wore his battered gray plate and a plain helm that left his face partly visible. As he and his opponent readied their mounts, Daenerys leaned forward in her seat, a flicker of anxiety in her eyes. She recalled that Jon was no stranger to swordplay or riding, but jousting had never been his calling. She prayed he wouldn't be humiliated by men who'd trained in this sport since youth. The horn sounded. Both horses charged. Jon's form was far from polished, but he remained calm, leaning into the angle just enough that his lance clashed with the Westerlands knight's shield. The knight's blow glanced off Jon's plate with a clang. Neither dismounted. They wheeled around for another pass. The second collision proved more decisive. Jon steadied his horse carefully, letting the knight's tilt slip aside while he struck near the knight's shield rim, unbalancing him. The man toppled with a grunt, and Jon rode by, breath caught in mild disbelief. A wave of cheers and surprise rippled across the stands. Freedman supporters rose from their seats, clapping vigorously, while local watchers exchanged astonished looks. Jon Snow advanced, albeit with a slightly awkward style, but a clear victory. Amid the cheers, Jon circled back, dismounted, and politely offered his fallen foe a hand up. The knight, dazed but not severely hurt, accepted with a rueful shake of the head. From the dais, Robert bellowed a hearty laugh, clapping Ned on the back. "Well, your boy has hidden talents, Ned? Freedman's champion indeed. We might see more upsets if Jon's got that cunning." Ned half smiled. "He's grown a great deal since the old days, your grace. Freedman taught him more than just illusions, it seems." Meanwhile, Freedman delegates in the stands hooped, excited to see one of their own adapt to Westerosi sport. In the next bracket, Varos took the field. The hush that fell was profound. People remembered the lethal magic he used to slay an assassin in these very halls. Now he would tilt with lance and mount, rather than arcane chance. He wore an odd patchwork of Freedman's leather with a few pieces of borrowed steel plate to cover vital areas, but no elaborate heraldry. He carried a basic lance, stoically ignoring the mutters of watchers who questioned if he might cheat with sorcery. His opponent, a seasoned knight from the Vale, looked nervous. King Robert watched with folded arms, Ned at his side, both uncertain how this would unfold. The horn blasted. Varos spurred his horse forward. His posture, though lacking the refined polish of a lifelong knight, radiated uncanny calm. The Vale Knight lowered his lance with all the practiced grace of a man who'd spent years on the tourney circuit. They crashed at mid-tilt, with striking steel in a shower of splinters. Astonishingly, Varos stayed in his saddle, absorbing the blow as though he weighed more than he should. The Vale Knight reeled from a strike to his left pauldron, nearly toppling but clinging to the reins. Neither unseated. A rumble of amazement coursed through the stands. Freedman watchers gripped the rails, quietly rooting for their herald. A second pass. The Vale Knight, determined, angled for a perfect blow. Varos moved his mount with minimal fuss. Their lances collided. This time, Varos's strike landed flush on the knight's shield, ripping him off balance. The knight toppled with a surprised cry, hitting the dirt. The Freedman side of the stands erupted in applause, while Westerosi lords stared in mute surprise. Even Robert barked a laugh, though the tension in his posture suggested he was uneasy seeing Freedman's sorcerer excel at a purely martial game. Varos rode a slow circle, then dismounted fluidly, offering the Vale Knight a hand up. The knight accepted warily, receiving Varos's polite nod. No illusions or sorcery had been visible, just raw skill or unnatural calm. Rumors soared instantly. Did Varos weigh down the horse with magic, or did Freedman's training ensure he was so stable in the saddle? None could say for sure. Robert hammered a fist on his dais again, exclaiming something about Freedman surprising him at every turn. Ned, more measured, acknowledged Freedman's skill stoically. Among the watchers, Lady Olenna Tyrell, perched near Marjorie, merely pursed her lips and muttered, "An odd lot indeed, these Freedmen. That Varos defies classification." Marjorie nodded absent-mindedly, captivated by how Freedman kept triumphing. Robb, sensing a potential final clash among Freedman participants, grinned in anticipation. The day progressed with further rounds. Oberin dispatched a second Tyrell knight in a swift duel that left the crowd roaring with delight. Jon overcame a flamboyant Reach knight who had boasted of unseating Freedman easily, only to find Jon's quiet resilience a match for his showy technique. Varos clashed with a Riverlands knight, absorbing blow after blow until the man was disarmed. With each victory, Freedman's presence grew more accepted or at least admired. Some lords whispered concerns that Freedman overshadowed local knights in skill, but others found it exciting. This was a chance to see Freedman prove they respected Westerosi sports. King Robert alternated between delight at the spectacle and frustration that he himself couldn't mount a charger and test Freedman in the field. Ned kept a vigilant eye, ensuring no chaos erupted from Freedman fans in the stands. The Free City's envoys watched with pursed lips, uncertain how Freedman overshadowed them even in a local game. Soon, it narrowed to 4 finalists. Oberin Martell, a skilled knight from Dorne who had proven unstoppable in these matches. A hardened knight from the Westerlands who had bested several men. Jon Snow, who kept winning despite lacking formal jousting training. And Varos, Freedman's sorcerer who shockingly triumphed in each tilt with calm. The crowd buzzed with speculation that Freedman might face Freedman in the final, overshadowing all local knights. That possibility excited some, while vexing others who worried Freedman might celebrate this as a symbolic conquest of Westerosi tradition. But for now, the next bracket pitted Oberin Martell against the Westerlands champion, and Jon Snow against Varos. The stands collectively inhaled, anticipating a Freedman showdown or perhaps a local upset. The first semifinal, Oberin Martell versus the Westerlands champion, a man named Ser Lambert, renowned for his steadfast lance technique. The ring of the horn signaled their pass. Oberin soared by with unerring precision, shattering lances left and right. Ser Lambert matched him blow for blow on the first pass, though Oberin's cunning slip in the second pass unhorsed him. The crowd roared as Oberin dismounted graciously, helping Lambert up. The final pass had left Lambert's arm numb, and Oberin was declared the victor. Applause rose. Freedman watchers admired Oberin's flamboyant flair, while the Dornish in the stands chanted his name. Now Oberin advanced to the final, smirking and bowing to the dais. Then came the second semifinal, Jon Snow versus Varos. A hush grew, deeper than any preceding match. Freedman legionnaires in the stands tensed at the idea of their champion sorcerer facing Daenerys' northern ally, both Freedmen in different ways. Some local lords sat forward, eager to see if Freedman's unstoppable might reign supreme, or if Jon might surprise them yet again. King Robert leaned, eyes narrowed, as if he, too, was uncertain whom to root for. Ned's face tightened. A fatherly worry for Jon's well-being mingled with curiosity about Freedman's power. Daenerys, perched near Freedman officers, drew a soft breath. She cared for Jon's success but felt no hostility toward Varos either. The entire realm's watchers recognized the significance. Freedman overshadowing Freedman, a test of skill that might reveal much about Freedman's internal synergy. Jon mounted a chestnut warhorse, adjusting his battered gray plate. Varos climbed onto a black steed Freedman had borrowed from the stables, once again an odd combination of partial plate and Freedman's robe. He offered Jon a polite tilt of the head across the tilt yard, acknowledging that whatever their alliance, they would face each other earnestly. Jon nodded back. The horn blared. Hoofs thundered. They charged. On the first pass, both angled lances with caution. Varos's blow struck Jon's shield in a glancing hit, while Jon's lance grazed Varos's right pauldron. Neither unseated. The crowd exhaled. Freedman cheered both men. Robert barked a laugh. They'll have to try harder than that. They wheeled for a second pass. This time, Jon calculated Varos's approach, recalling how Freedman expansions thrived on cunning timing. He angled his shield, letting Varos's lance slip by. Simultaneously, Jon struck Varos's chest plate with enough force to rock him in the saddle. A gasp rippled across the yard, yet Varos clung to the reins, not tumbling. The stands roared at the near upset. Freedman legionnaires half rose, anxious or excited. Varos stabilized his mount, eyes flashing with focus. A mild grin tugged at his lips, as if acknowledging Jon's cunning. They spun for a third pass. Tension soared. Ned's heart hammered. Daenerys leaned forward, fists tight. Freedman watchers chanted Varos's name, while local watchers found themselves rooting for Jon or simply breathless at Freedman's prowess. The horn sounded again, and the two men thundered along the tilt. Varos angled a heavier blow, but Jon feinted at the last instant. Their lances collided in a splintering crash. The crowd lost sight of the details in a swirl of dust and shattered wood. When the dust cleared, Varos wobbled dangerously, nearly toppling. He tried to steady, but the force had unbalanced him. With a startled grunt, Freedman's champion fell from the saddle, hitting the dirt in a tumble of robes and armor. The entire yard erupted in an uproar. Jon slowed his horse, chest heaving, uncertain if Varos had used illusions or not. But clearly, Freedman's unstoppable might was not unstoppable in the realm of the joust. The stands collectively roared in stunned excitement. King Robert pounded his dais in astonished delight. Ned exhaled in relief. Freedman legionnaires stood in shock. Varos rose, unhurt but dusty. He regarded Jon with a moment of silence, then offered a short bow, acknowledging defeat. Jon, dismounting, hurried to him, extending a gloved hand. Varos took it graciously, a mild grin on his lips. The crowd's cheers soared. Freedman recognized that magic had not guaranteed Varos victory in this mundane sport. Many local watchers found new respect for Jon's skill. Freedman expansions overshadowed Balerion, but Freedman's champion could still fall to a mortal blow in the joust. And so Jon Snow advanced to the final, facing Oberin Martell. The entire yard buzzed with unstoppable excitement. Freedman supporters reeled from Varos's defeat but rallied behind Jon, who was also Freedman in spirit. Meanwhile, the local lords who once doubted Freedman's sincerity marveled at how honorably Varos had participated and accepted his loss. Oberin, across the tilt yard, gave a mischievous grin, meeting Jon's gaze. The crowd sensed a final spectacle. Robert roared for a quick respite so each finalist might rest. Ned hurried to Jon, placing a hand on his shoulder with fatherly pride. "Well done, lad. Freedman or not, you fought with courage, skill. I had no notion you'd become so adept." Jon, breathless, could only smile and say he'd learned from Freedman's rigorous training. Freedman expansions might overshadow the known world, but Freedman also valued discipline in arms. Daenerys approached next, offering a sincere congratulations, eyes shining with pride. She told Varos quietly that his sportsmanship impressed her, and Varos shrugged, seemingly unbothered by the loss. Moments later, the final was called: Jon Snow versus Oberin Martell, best of 3 passes. The yard's hush grew absolute as each mounted. Oberin wore his flamboyant Dornish armor, sun and spear emblazoned on his shield, a bright orange plume on his helm. Jon remained in battered gray plate, Freedman colors at the edge of his cloak. The Freedman and Westerosi watchers both found it difficult to pick a favorite. Oberin's cunning spear style in battles of old was legendary, but the joust was not always his domain. yet he had proven unstoppable so far. Meanwhile, Jon had just unseated Freedman's famed champion, a feat no one expected. Perhaps fate would favor him again. They readied their lances. The horn signaled. Hoofs pounded the earth. Both men charged, focusing intently on each other's posture. The first pass collided with a resounding crack of wood on steel. Both reeled but stayed mounted. Cheers erupted on both sides. Freedman delegates bellowed Jon's name, while Dornishmen and local lords urged Oberin on. The second pass arrived quickly, Oberin employing a daring shift in the saddle. Jon nearly missed but angled at the last second. Their lances struck shield edges with force. Oberin wobbled dangerously, but his seat remained firm. Jon too managed to stay aloft. The stands roared at the stalemate, tension building with every heartbeat. Daenerys clenched her fists. Marjorie's eyes flashed in excitement. Even Robert leaned forward, bellowing for them to hit each other harder. The third pass decided it. Silence reigned as they thundered forward. Oberin tried a risky feint, adjusting his lance's angle at the final instant. Jon, anticipating some trick, steeled himself and guided his horse with Freedman's discipline, letting Oberin's blow sail wide while delivering a direct strike near the Martell's shield center. Oberin crashed onto the tilt barrier, his shield battered aside, and he lost his grip, toppling onto the dusty ground. The entire yard erupted in a storm of shouts and applause. Oberin lay there for a moment, winded but not gravely hurt, cursing colorfully under his breath. Freedman legionnaires in the stands roared, lifting Freedman banners. Local watchers let out cheers, some in disbelief that Jon Snow had triumphed over such formidable foes. The Freedman expansions overshadowed Balerion, but here was Jon, bridging Freedman training and Westerosi skill, crowned champion of the joust. Robert, in a fit of exuberance, stood from his seat and clapped loudly. "Seven hells, lad, you've done it!" he bellowed across the yard, ignoring the fact that the herald was the one who should be announcing the winner. Ned chuckled softly at the king's outburst, relief and pride mixing in his face. Daenerys rose as well, joining Freedman and local lords in applause. Oberin, though vexed at losing, let out a rueful grin as Jon dismounted and came to help him up. "Curse your cunning, Snow," Oberin muttered. "But well fought. Next time, perhaps we tilt with spears or swords instead." Jon merely returned a respectful nod. The herald stepped forward, voice booming across the stands. "The winner of this day's joust is Jon Snow, Freedman's ambassador and champion of these lists." The crowd roared anew, Freedman and Westerosi alike. At the dais, Marjorie beamed, turning to Robb, who returned her smile with a proud nod. Freedman might overshadow everything, but for once, a simpler martial tradition triumphed without bitterness. On the field, Freedman officers rushed forward to congratulate Jon. A swirl of excited voices followed. Then, just as the herald signaled the official close of the tournament, the sky above turned darker, like a temporary eclipse of the sun. Gasps arose as two monstrous dragons soared overhead, their roars echoing off the Red Keep's ramparts. Freedman recognized them as Scourge and Vermilion, two of the largest beasts in Daenerys and Varos's brood, returning from some flight outside the city. They glided in stately arcs over the tilt yard, as if drawn by the uproar of the crowd. The watchers collectively stared, half in awe, half in alarm. Jon lifted his eyes, recalling how he once rode Scourge in Essos, a memory that left him with chills. Freedman delegates pointed skyward, excited that Freedman's unstoppable dragons had come to mark Jon's victory. The stands again erupted in cheers or nervous laughter. King Robert, arms folded, glared up at the overshadowing shapes with an exasperated grin, as though to say, "Fucking Freedman theatrics." But a part of him admired the spectacle. Even Ned stared, remembering how Freedman overshadowed Balerion. The dragons circled once, their roars resonating in every chest. Then, with the grace of colossal predators, they wheeled away, heading beyond the city walls. Freedman legionnaires in the stands whispered that the beasts likely flew to meet Maelstrom in the new dragon pit Freedman had built outside King's Landing. So the crowd realized this was Freedman's salute to Jon's triumph. Indeed, beyond the city's gates, an open swath of land had been allocated as a dragon pit while Freedman lingered in the capital. Maelstrom, the largest dragon of all, had been resting there since Freedman's arrival, avoiding panic by not entering the city proper. Now, as Scourge and Vermilion soared overhead, watchers on the walls spotted them converge with Maelstrom near the pit. The three mighty dragons roared in unison, a thunderous chord audible for miles. That resonance drifted back to the tilt yard, rattling the hearts of every participant. Freedman expansions overshadow Balerion indeed, thought many in the stands. This display confirmed it. Yet, ironically, Freedman had not used these beasts to manipulate the tournament. Jon's victory was purely his own. Down on the field, Varos approached Jon, removing parts of his borrowed plate. He gave a short laugh of apparent delight. "Well done, Snow. Freedman expansions rely on cosmic flame, but you proved Freedman also adapt to local ways. You overcame me and Oberin without illusions or dragons. A victory the entire realm will note." Jon bowed slightly in gratitude, still catching his breath from the final tilt. "Thank you, Varos. I worried you might slip an enchantment into the pass, but you played fairly." Varos shook his head calmly. "A Freedman champion does not cheat in a realm's beloved sport. That would tarnish the peace we build. You deserved the triumph." Freedman delegates who overheard nodded in agreement, content with how honorably Varos had comported himself. Oberin, overhearing, strode up with a half-smile. "You Freedmen are surprisingly sporting. I might have teased you for overshadowing the joust with monstrous beasts overhead, but you let Jon's skill speak for itself. This was a day we shall remember. Let the realm see Freedmen forging synergy rather than fear." A hush fell as King Robert approached, Ned and several lords in tow. Freedman parted to let the king pass. Robert, arms folded, eyed Jon with a wry grin. "Well done, lad. If I'd been allowed to compete, I might have tested that Freedman training of yours. But the realm would have scolded me if I broke a limb. So consider yourself lucky, Snow." Jon, smiling politely, replied, "You honor me, your grace. I'd not presume to unseat the king had you competed, though I suspect you'd have put up a mighty fight." The Freedman delegates around them gave mild chuckles. Robert barked a laugh, slapping Ned's shoulder. "Hear that, Ned? He's as diplomatic with a lance as he is with words. Good. Freedmen might overshadow us, but a few ways remain for men of the realm to hold their own." Then, turning to Varos, Robert's tone cooled only slightly. "Your skill, sorcerer, was not trifling. Surprised me you'd risk your neck in a mere joust. But it's a show of respect, I suppose." Varos dipped his head. "Yes, your grace. We Freedmen do not see ourselves as above your customs. If forging peace means embracing a bit of Westerosi sport, so be it. I nearly unseated your champion, but the better rider prevailed." Ned, scanning the horizon, saw the faint silhouettes of dragons still circling outside the city. Freedmen overshadowing Balerion, indeed, but overshadowed themselves in the joust. He found a certain poetry in that. He turned to Jon, voice full of fatherly warmth. "You have grown beyond what I imagined, Jon. Your mother," he paused, remembering the unspoken truths, "would be proud of how you carry yourself. On behalf of House Stark, we are proud to see you champion Freedman in a fair contest." Jon swallowed, nodding respectfully. He dared not reveal deeper secrets about his lineage or private ties to Daenerys. He simply accepted the praise, grateful to see Freedman and House Stark find synergy again. Meanwhile, Freedman legionnaires cheered his name from the stands, enthralled to see Freedman's chosen ambassador best local knights. And local watchers, though some might grumble about Freedman overshadowing the tournament with dragons overhead, admitted the final had been enthralling. Jon unseating Varos and then Oberin in consecutive matches. As the crowd began dispersing, heralds announced the official awarding of the champion's purse to Jon. The Freedman side roared approval, while local lords gave polite applause. A few knightly contenders looked sullen, but none dared challenge Freedman's result. The day ended in a swirl of mild feasting around the tilt yard, with King Robert, Ned, and Freedman leaders exchanging final pleasantries. Daenerys approached Jon, a faint grin on her lips. She teased that Freedman expansions overshadowed entire continents, but apparently Freedman jousters overshadowed local knights as well. He retorted that it was more his northern training than Freedman illusions, spurring gentle laughter. In the late afternoon hush, Freedman's dragons soared back to their pit. Scourge, Vermilion, and Maelstrom converged with thunderous roars near the city's outskirts, stirring dust and awe among small folk who peered from the walls. Freedman watchers guided the beasts into the custom enclosures, ensuring no panic erupted. The city's sentries relaxed once the dragons nestled safely behind sturdy walls. Freedman overshadowed Balerion, but at least they did so politely outside city limits. Meanwhile, Freedman participants, including Jon, Varos, and Oberin, returned from the tilt yard to wash and rest. The dust of the joust caked their armor, and while Freedman might overshadow the realm in power, they remained mortal enough to need a bath after hours in the saddle. That evening, a smaller gathering formed in one of the Red Keep's lesser halls, celebrating the successful tournament. Freedman delegates, a handful of Westerosi lords, and some Free Cities envoys joined in a mild feast. Jon arrived in simpler clothes, the champion's token pinned at his chest, an embroidered patch awarding him the day's victory. Oberin lounged in a corner, regaling local knights with embellished tales of how Jon bested him. Varos, wearing his usual crimson robes, quietly sipped spiced wine near Daenerys, listening to Freedman officers discuss their next departure date. King Robert was absent, presumably off in a smaller circle complaining he'd not been allowed to compete. Ned mingled, ensuring Freedman faced no hostility. Marjorie and Robb circulated, sharing a laugh about Freedman overshadowing Balerion in nearly everything, from dragons to just, though this time Freedman overshadowed Freedman as well. The mood was surprisingly light, given the realm's prior tensions. At one point, Varos approached Jon, a thin smile playing on his lips. "Congratulations again, champion of the joust. Freedman expansions overshadow Balerion, yet Freedman's illusions did not overshadow you. The final pass was indeed decisive." Jon bowed slightly. "Thank you, Varos. I still can't believe it. My skill in the saddle is thanks to northern drills and Freedman's forging of discipline. I never expected to unseat you or Oberin, but luck favored me." Varos nodded. "Perhaps not only luck. Lawloress Flame might find subtle ways to guide the chosen. Or so the Red Priests say. Either way, Freedman or not, you proved your own might. The realm sees Freedman as more than unstoppable dragons now. They see mortal skill bridging cultures." Jon chuckled quietly. "Aye, maybe that helps. The realm might trust Freedman more if they see we adapt to their ways, not simply overshadow them with monstrous beasts. If ever Freedman expansions cross further, we might rely on such goodwill." Varos agreed, taking a measured sip of wine. "Precisely. Let the realm remember Freedman by your sporting triumph, not by fear alone." The day Scourge and Vermilion soared overhead only added drama, not terror. A hopeful sign that Freedman overshadow but do not crush. Oberin interjected then, drifting over with a small group of Freedman watchers. "I hear Freedman expansions overshadow everything, but Freedman's champion overshadowed me in the tilt yard." He flashed a wry grin, inclining his head toward Jon. "Well met, Snow. Next time we shall duel with spears, and we'll see if Freedman illusions protect you then." Jon returned the grin. "I'll brace myself, Prince Oberin. You fought well. I feared you might slip a dagger mid-joust, but I see you can handle a lance after all." Oberin laughed lightly, swirling a cup of spiced mead. "Touché. No illusions, no daggers, only the lance. Freedman overshadow me no more. You overshadowed me fair and square." Freedman watchers laughed. The tension-laced day had eased into banter. From across the hall, Ned and Daenerys exchanged small smiles at the sight of Freedman and Westerosi men joking over the day's results. Marjorie whispered to Robb that the city might gossip for weeks about Freedman overshadowing local knights, but the fact that Freedman had integrated so seamlessly was a boon to peace. Robb nodded in agreement, recalling how not long ago Freedman expansions overshadowing Balerion had been a cause for dread. Now Freedman overshadowed the joust as well, but in a friendly manner. At the end of the evening, Freedman drifted back to their assigned quarters in the Red Keep, content that the tourney had ended in no fiasco. Jon, cradling the champion's token, took a final walk through the corridors, letting the day's excitement settle in his mind. He found Daenerys in a small solar, relaxing on a cushioned seat. She congratulated him once more, remarking on how Robert might envy that Freedman overshadowed even him in sporting feats. Jon admitted he felt a pang of sympathy for the king, forced to watch from the sidelines. Daenerys found it mildly amusing that Freedman soared so quickly to acceptance by demonstrating skill in the realm's beloved pastime. Varos parted from them, heading to a balcony to commune quietly with the starlight, as he often did. Freedman overshadowed Balerion, overshadowed local knights, overshadowed illusions, but Varos remained a mystery to many. Some Freedman watchers reported that in the night's hush, they could hear him chanting softly to the Lord of Light, perhaps reflecting on destiny. Meanwhile, the city's sentries glimpsed the silhouettes of Scourge, Vermilion, and Maelstrom curled in the makeshift dragon pit outside, resting beneath torchlight. Freedman overshadowing the realm in might, yet apparently calm. The day concluded with the entire capital drifting into rest, Freedman overshadowing all but raising no threat. The vow of peace endured. Over the next dawn, a small crowd formed by the dragon pit to watch the three monstrous beasts greet the sunrise. Scourge, black-scaled with burning eyes, emitted a slow, thunderous rumble that vibrated in watchers' chests. Vermilion, shimmering in red and gold, stretched its wings in a graceful display. Maelstrom, largest of them all, overshadowed the other two in raw scale, a titan among Freedman's brood. Freedman legionnaires ringed the pit, ensuring no local thrill-seekers wandered too close. The day's routine resumed. Freedman prepared to finalize their presence in King's Landing, though some rumored they might remain longer if the realm desired more demonstrations. King Robert found enough satisfaction in seeing Freedman overshadowed in the joust by Jon, yet Freedman overshadowing the realm in their unstoppable expansions. A delicate equilibrium that signaled Westeros and Freedman might truly coexist peacefully. By midday, Freedman and local lords convened in a short session to discuss trade routes. Jon, champion of the joust, took pride of place as Freedman's official envoy. Lords who once doubted Freedman's sincerity found it easier to accept Freedman overshadowing them, given the courtesy Freedman had shown in the joust. The conversation concluded with a new pledge. Freedman would continue forging ties with the realm, overshadowing old feuds with the promise of mutual gain. No illusions overshadowed the realm this day, only the memory of a tournament that showcased Freedman's mortal side, overshadowed by unstoppable power but tempered by honest sport. As evening fell again, the Freedman's retinue decided on one last gathering near the pit, letting the city's folk see dragons up close, at least from a safe distance. Jon, wearing the champion's medal, strolled among Freedman officers, explaining Westeros's response to their expansions. Varos, perched on a vantage, offered mild remarks about how cosmic flame guided Freedman's destiny. Daenerys spoke to Ned about departing soon, ensuring no tensions festered. Robb and Marjorie arrived with a small escort, marveling at the dragons anew, remembering the hush of the tilt yard as Freedman overshadowed local knights. That hush felt strangely akin to the hush that overcame bystanders whenever Freedman's unstoppable might soared overhead. At one point, Jon found Robb quietly admiring the dragons from a vantage near the pit's edge. He approached, hearing Robb murmur, "Truly massive. Hard to fathom how we overcame the undead at the wall without this scale of power." Jon nodded, recalling Freedman's synergy in that war. The two men exchanged a final reflection on the day's joust. Robb teased that he might one day take up a lance to challenge Freedman himself. Jon laughed, encouraging him to try, though Freedman overshadow all illusions in such contests. Then Varos drifted by, hearing the conversation, and reaffirmed Freedman's vow to aid the realm if new horrors emerged. Robb thanked him again, recalling how Freedman expansions overshadowing Balerion proved unstoppable, Yet Freedman's vow overshadowed old suspicions. Finally, as night deepened, Freedman delegates began dispersing to rest, preparing for an eventual departure in the week ahead. The city's mood soared from the successful tournament, overshadowed by Freedman's show of skill, but without rancor. Many local watchers concluded Freedman overshadowed Balerion not just with monstrous dragons but also with surprising chivalry. Oberin Martell strolled through the corridors, still bantering about his defeat, threatening to claim victory in a future spear contest. Jon modestly accepted the day's accolades, more content that Freedman overshadowed war with courtesy. Daenerys praised him for bridging Freedman discipline with Westerosi tradition, overshadowing the fear that Freedman relied solely on dragons or illusions. And so the day closed, with the lingering memory of the joust dominating talk in King's Landing's taverns and noble halls. Freedman overshadowed Balerion with unstoppable expansions, but in a single day's tournament, Freedman also showed a mortal side, losing gracefully or winning on skill alone. Jon, crowned champion, found himself elevated as a symbol of Freedman's synergy with Westeros. Meanwhile, overhead, the three colossal dragons soared at twilight, greeting the stars with roars that echoed across the plains beyond the city walls. In that final tableau, Freedman overshadowed illusions, overshadowed fear, overshadowed old feuds, leaving behind a realm that dared to hope for peace, even as unstoppable flame hovered at its doorstep.